Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Larry Bograd, an award-winning, widely translated author, screenwriter, and documentary filmmaker. And his new memoir, Blood Flow, is about his 4-decade journey to understand his father's suicide when he was 13 years old. We'll talk about this. We'll talk about life. We'll talk about grief. We'll talk about healing as well as memoir writing. Welcome to the show, Larry.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
Welcome. Welcome to the show, Larry. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe, a lot of writers across the globe, a lot of other people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to discuss right now. As I said, we'll be talking about grief, we'll talk about healing, and we'll also learn about memoir writing from you. But before that, let's understand a bit about your journey, your background, so that people know who they are listening to, Larry.
Sure. So I was born in Denver, Colorado in the U.S., and I grew up here. My parents both moved here from the East Coast. My father was actually born in Eastern Europe and came to this country when he was 3 years old. And he had an older brother who got TB. And at the time, Colorado was a place where TB patients, tuberculosis patients came to cure because of the high dry air here. And then my dad joined his brother here in probably about 1940, went to college, went to medical school. And then he was drafted into the U.S. Army Occupation Forces. After World War II, he served in Trieste. My mother was born in New York, and she came out here when she married my father. And so basically, I've lived in Denver the bulk of my life. I did go away for college, grad school, and I spent a year in New York City. I'm sorry, I spent 10 years in New York City, where I started getting published. I published 11 children's books until I ran into some book banning and censorship issues. And then I moved back to Denver. I got involved in the local theater where I met my wife, who's a wonderful writer, Colleen Hubbard. And we have 3 daughters, all of whom now are in their 30s. So that's kind of the long and the short of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All in their 30s. But you took 4 decades to write this particular book. We'll come to other parts of your story, but this particular, why 4 decades? In between, you had many other things that you had written, but this one, memoir, took a lot of time. Generally, people start with a memoir or something.
I've read 20-year-olds who got their memoirs published, as if you want to say, well, how long has your life been so far? But in any event, so my dad died just a couple of weeks after my 13th birthday. He committed suicide. He was sent home on an ill-advised day pass and committed suicide here in the home. And so it was quite a shock, obviously, and a horrible thing that happened. But I almost immediately wanted to learn more about his situation. I learned that he had had previous hospitalizations for depression, for instance. I started talking to his older brother, other relatives, family, friends. And when I was 19 years old, I wrote a novel based on his suicide and my reaction to it. It wasn't a very good novel, but I was only 19 years old. And I've been trying for decades since to try to perfect that memoir. This involved talking to a lot more people. It involved getting several hospitals to release my dad's medical records when he was hospitalized for depression. It also involved me meeting relatives that I only met once for the purpose of interviews. I also interviewed my mom and other family members here in Denver. And then when I was 20 years old, I went to Europe, taking a break from college. I went to Trieste, where my dad was stationed after the war, and didn't really learn much there, but at least I kind of soaked in the environment there. And then I even pushed east to go to the town where he was born, which is now part of the southwest Ukraine. And again, I didn't really learn much there. I kind of disappointed in the town, but I also realized at the time that I would have had to met somebody who knew my family 40 years earlier, was likely Jewish, spoke English, had never left that town, who had survived pogroms, uh, the Bolsheviks, the Nazis, and I kind of realized that the place alone wasn't going to share a lot of insights for me.
Absolutely, Larry. So let's try and understand few things, which some questions that I think my audience may have in mind. Firstly, you were 13 years old, came to know about your father at that point in time, unfortunate event that happened. How did it impact you? Did it just impact you, or did you also want to understand at that point in time what happened, why it happened, why the reasons behind it? Did you know about mental health? I don't think at that point in time people used to talk that much about mental health. I just want to go back in time with
Sure.
you and understand it from your point of view, Larry.
Well, I mean, clearly it impacted me a lot. I think anybody who has a parent die, really at any age, there's going to be a grief process. When a parent dies by suicide, it's not a natural thing, right? So it's a trauma you have to recover from. It also affected my family in the sense that my parents had built what they called their dream home, a custom built home. My mother had to sell that house. Then we moved into a fairly small townhouse. She went back to work. She hadn't worked for a while. So there were a lot of things like that that had immediate effects. But, it's also because he committed suicide. I mean, you make a good point. I mean, people didn't talk about mental illness. This is in the 1966. And people had a lot of people had a lot of judgmental attitude towards suicide. Like they would either blame the person for committing suicide, or they can't believe that somebody would take their own life, or some people referred to suicide as self-murder. I mean, it had a very negative connotation, and I'm not suggesting it's a positive thing. It's a horrible thing. But pretty quickly, after that, I started reading about suicide and grief. I was probably no more than 15 or 16 years old when I started reading the Algerian French philosopher Albert Camus, who wrote a very famous essay on suicide, in which he said suicide is the one existential question that every human asks him or herself. And then I started reading more. There was some other books out on suicide, and then, but yeah, I think my dad sadly died where there was very little treatment, and probably even the diagnosis wasn't very good. It was fairly clear in my research that he actually had a brain tumor that could have affected his emotions and his mood, but they never really investigated that, and it may have been inoperative anyway. So there's a lot of things like that kind of people started talking about with more openness and more compassion. That also allowed me to fold that stuff into my thinking and eventually into this book.
Absolutely. We will also come to the memoir part, but looking at it from that point in time, as you said, people judge, people look at things, have their own observation of things. Did you at any point in life, at that point in time, you were very young, or even later on, or even till now, did you ever judge your father? He left you and his family alone, or you did not have a father after that? It could, everybody wants a father around them when they grow up.
Oh yeah, for sure. And for years after he died, I kept thinking I saw him like on a passing bus or across the street. I mean, I think it's very hard to internalize that kind of loss. My mom went into therapy after my dad died, and one night she came home and told my siblings and me, I have an older sister and a younger brother, that we should be really angry at our dad. In fact, furious for what he did and how he left us. But I don't know, maybe it's just part of my personality, but I never really felt a lot of anger towards him. I obviously felt a lot of misunderstanding until I learned more about it. But I kind of felt that, he was in the throes of mental illness, and I don't think he would have rationally made the choice to die because he was a really great dad and things like that. So I think that's also helped me in my recovery from grief, is that I never really felt that I had to settle a score or go through life with a lot of negative feelings towards my dad.
Right, right, Larry. Was there any, you can say, uh, attachment to these two stories about your dad and you getting into children's book writing?
Oh, no. No. I kind of backed into children's book writing. I went to New York after completing a master's, and I brought a novel I wrote there thinking I'd get it published very quickly and become rich and famous and get a lot of opportunities, but very quickly learned that the New York publishing world is a tough world to break into. And I was looking for a job, and I just answered an ad that it happened to be for a children's publisher. So at one point, I saw a really wonderful illustration in the New York Times, and I brought it to my boss, and I said, we should sign this guy up to do a book. And I said, maybe I'll write one for him. He had a kind of dark sense of humor in his drawings. So that's how it started. And, that book ended up being selected as the best book for children in that certain year. So yeah, I kind of found myself writing children's book. It was certainly nothing that happened. My dad wrote kind of corny poems when he was young, like for birthdays and anniversaries and such, but I never really saw him focus much on writing, much less focus on writing for children.
Absolutely. So when did your healing actually happen? Or did you not require any sort of a healing? Maybe it just happened gradually, and perhaps you don't even realize. You just get on with life.
No, I think it took a lot of support from other people. For instance, maybe 1 or 2 years after my dad died, my mom offered my siblings and me the opportunity to go see a psychologist who specialized in children and adolescents, and I'm the only one that wanted to give it a try. And I ended up seeing this gentleman for a couple of years, maybe, and we never talked much about my dad, but I just think having a place to go that was safe to talk about my emotions and to have a father type figure in my life really helped me a lot. And over the years, I've been in and out of therapy, not always about my dad. Other issues came up, like when I had unexpected heart surgery. I had to kind of figure out how I was going to emotionally cope with that, things of that nature. So I think it's really almost impossible to move away from grief without a lot of support from loved ones and in some cases from professionals.
Absolutely. And now let's come to your memoir itself, Blood Flow. Why the name Blood Flow, Larry?
Well, this book, I probably wrote about 8 or 10 different iterations of this book, and I rewrote each of those iterations a lot of times, and I tried a bunch of different titles. And even when I had it accepted by a publisher, they didn't like the title that I was working with at the time. And so actually my wife came up with it. She's a very creative person. And we kind of liked the fact that blood flow had kind of different meanings. I mean, blood obviously means the blood in our bodies, but it also means family. Like blood relation, for instance, is a term we have here in the States. And it also kind of meant life force. And then flow, again, had that kind of double meaning where obviously blood flow means circulation through the heart, keeping us alive. But to me, it also kind of meant the passage of time. And certainly my creative process felt like a flow over the years. So my publisher ended up liking that title, and that's why we're using it.
Absolutely. So if I understand, you talk about, took decades to write. When did this idea first germinated in your mind? It must have been in your in your 20s, 30s? When did you?
Yeah, a little bit earlier. So as I indicate, I think when I was 19 years old, I came home from college and I got hired as a lifeguard at a new housing development. And the pool was open, and that was part of the arrangements with the people who were moving there, that the pool would be open all summer. However, the townhouses were not built. So I still had to go out there and sit by myself by this pool. I think in the entire summer, maybe one person came and swam. So I brought a notebook with me and I started sketching out episodes. And that was that. A lot of that resulted in that book that I published when I was 19. So since then, as I said, I've learned a lot. In my early 50s, I had this unexpected heart surgery. I've woven that into the memoir. And later in my mid 30s, when I moved back to Denver from New York, I married a wonderful creative woman, and we had 3 daughters, and that brought a lot of love and emotion and support to me too. So that's also part of that flow, I guess,
Absolutely. So, after 4 decades almost, thinking of this book, why did you want to write it? Means it. These were good memories, not so good memories, painful memories. Why did you? Was it a risk for you, or was it a part of healing for you, Larry?
I think it was a part of healing. I'm a book author. I would thought that, I think, not necessarily, but I think everybody has 1 or 2 monumental stories in their life. Sometimes it's trauma, sometimes it's adventure, sometimes it's a relationship. But I really think that almost all humans have a kind of seminal event. I mean, one that doesn't necessarily define their life, but one that you go back to over and over again, and you think about and rethink about and treat it, memories and things like that. So I think it was a combination of trying to get my story out there in the same way that I try to get some of my fiction out there, or my plays, or the documentary film out there to a wider audience. But definitely it had a lot to do with closure. I don't have any great need to rewrite this book again in another decade. So I think it definitely was part of the healing process, but it also was part of a creative process, in that I felt it took me a lot of different attempts to try to get the structure right, to get the narrative right, how I wanted to tell the story. I ended up breaking up the chronology, which wasn't part of the original scheme. My brother read an earlier version, and he said something to the effect of, I know this is really serious stuff, but I really miss humor. You're kind of a funny guy, but you have nothing in the book to offer some levity to this very, very, tough story. So then I went back, and largely in my growing up years, I added some humor, things like that. So, it evolved. So I think after a while, it became more of a creative challenge than an emotional one, if that makes sense to you. Just trying to get the book right.
Absolutely. So, you have the memories of your dad till when you were 13, and afterwards, through different stories. How did you research about this? Whose eyes did you write it? From your own eyes, or at different point in time, you looked at it from different people's perspective?
I largely always kept it from my point of view, but as I tried to write it as a novel several times. I tried to write it as almost like journalism, without emotions, just kind of laying out the facts. So I think I always was operating from the position of the son, not just as a boy, but also growing up with this parent loss and dealing with my own episodes of mental challenges. Fortunately, I never was super depressed. I feel myself really fortunate there. So yeah, I tried it a lot of different ways. So I think that's one thing that I think. And then also, as I said, I interviewed some first cousins of my dad. I only interviewed once. They were older when I talked to them in the 1970s, but they gave me a lot of information about how my dad came back from World War II in Trieste, a very changed man, and how they greeted him, and how they just looked at him and they realized that this was not the Nathan Bograd that they knew before the war. And so that gave me some clues into trying to, and they also told me, gave me information about his first hospitalization. So there was just kind of picking up clues like that. And then I obviously contacted the hospitals for the records. That took some effort because even though the patient had been dead for decades, hospitals don't like releasing records. And then I interviewed my uncle, who my dad was in medical practice with several times. I interviewed my mom probably a half a dozen times. I interviewed family friends. So, I mean, there was a lot of pieces that kind of came together that helped me put the story together.
Absolutely. Any unexpected discoveries you made during about your father during your investigation, or was it the same story that you had heard all through the years?
Well, I mean, the hospitalizations were very eye-opening. I mean, they treated him with pretty massive electroshock therapy, which of course they wouldn't do to that degree today. There was also a doctor who felt that he might have had homosexual tendencies, which I only saw reported in one hospitalization record. So I don't know what to make of that or what that doctor based that on. I also learned a lot about how my dad was just a 3-year-old when his father died of TB of the bone, and that the family left Europe very quickly because of all the anti-Semitism, and that they had a very rough journey to America. And he was injured literally in the long lines of immigrants trying to get off on the boats, things like that. So there are a lot of small details like that that I learned largely from interviews that I would never have been able to find on my own.
After the book, all the investigation, everything, did you understand your dad better? Did you start empathizing with him more because of the hardships that he faced? War is not an easy thing, and then when he enlisted also. So I want to understand from a writer's point of view, from a son's point of view, how did you look at your dad after the memoir?
Well, it was very interesting. The last time I talked to a doctor, again, this is decades after my dad died, was here in Colorado, where he was hospitalized and where he was released and committed suicide. And the psychiatrist who helped me go through the records said something to the effect of, I look at your dad's life, both the trauma he suffered as a child and living through the depression when his mother was working 2 jobs and having to put himself through medical school and going to Europe. And he visited several what were called displaced persons camps, were really people who had survived the Holocaust who couldn't go home. And then his other future hospitalizations, which he kept a secret, basically, from my siblings and myself. So I think I always felt a lot of compassion for him, but I also felt that I know him pretty well now. But anyway, the psychiatrist said to me, I look at these records, I look at the history of your father, and there's part of me that says he did pretty well surviving as long as he did. That, because of his patterns of depression and psychosis and the worry about this brain tumor getting worse and worse and worse, that the psychiatrist was almost amazed that he had lived 49 years. So, there's a lot of stuff like that comes out. I certainly, like anybody who has a loved one die when they're young, you miss it. He didn't see me get out of high school. He didn't see me graduate college. He didn't visit me in New York City. He didn't know about my books being published. He didn't meet my wife. He never met his granddaughters. I mean, there's so many things when you think about, wouldn't it have been nice if my dad was here? So there's that longing that never goes away. And there's, I wouldn't say it's on a daily basis, but, several times a week, something will trigger the grief or sometimes even a happy memory of him. So that kind of primal emotion that you have with your parents, I don't think it ever goes away.
Absolutely. And today, the issue of mental illness, mental health, depression, everything. Armed forces, the number of people taking their own lives after coming back home, that number is a stark reminder of the life down there in the in warfare during difficult times. And when you come back, you are a different man altogether. Do you think with all these things now you understand life better, life of your dad better, the life of the armed forces people better? How do you see it all together? Looks like life comes to a full circle almost.
Oh yeah, I think I understand. Oh, I think first of all, I think anytime you're getting older, unless you're like living in a cave, hopefully you're going to understand life better, right? But I think I certainly had a lot more compassion for like, military vets who come home and are diagnosed with PTSD, which was not a diagnosis until the Vietnam War, I'm pretty sure. So I think people really underestimated what happened to men and women who served in the armed forces, and particularly if they were in very nasty situations, battles, or in medical care, things like that. But I think I guess I'm also fortunate that part of my wiring is I really like the fact that I'm alive. We live pretty close to the Rocky Mountains, and when I go out in the morning to get the newspaper and I look and I see the sun rising over the mountains, I'm really glad I'm alive to see that. So, yeah, I'm 72. Who knows how much longer I have, but I'll look back on a life that I feel was well lived, and that I did as much as I could to get joy and happiness and understanding.
Right, Larry. How have you told about your dad to your children, daughters?
It kind of unfolded over the years. They obviously, the youngest of my daughters once had a school assignment when she was maybe in kindergarten. I mean, very young, and she came home with kind of stick figures of all the people in my family, and there was the five of us, and her grandparents who were living, and then on the side of this drawing there was a stick figure, and she said, and that's your dad. He belongs to the dead part of the family. So I think they always refer to Grandma, or I'm sorry, Grandpa Nathan. He was kind of a figure in their life, even though just kind of like an image more than obviously they didn't know him. But I thought that was really sweet of them. I used to visit my dad's grave at the cemetery every year on the anniversary of his death, May 21st. And there was times as the kids got older where they came with my wife and me, and we went. And I think finally, maybe she was 12 or so, our eldest daughter, Allie, kind of asked me about my dad, and I actually told her, that he had committed suicide and what that meant and things like that. And she broke into tears and hugged me, and she said, "Daddy, don't ever do that." And I think as each of the other girls got a little bit older, I didn't hide anything from them. It's part of our family story, not necessarily a happy part of our story, but they've been very open to it, and they've always shown a lot of compassion. And, occasionally they'll just say something like, "You must really miss your dad." Fortunate that they've had the experience of having a dad a long time, and a mom, of course. So I think all the kids eventually knew the story, and I think one of the nice things I really got out of that was how much compassion they had for somebody they never met, as well as compassion for what I went through.
Absolutely. So, who is this memoir for? I know it's your memoir, but still, who is this memoir for?
Well, I'm hoping people will reread it because it's a good story, because it's interesting in the way that I wrote it. I think also because a lot of people maybe get stuck on their journey of forgiveness and compassion. And a lot of people appreciate reading someone's story of a person who kind of along the way makes sense of horrible events. It doesn't make the events any less horrible, but at some point you can put them in a different kind of perspective. So I think it's not necessarily just for people who are grieving or survived parent loss. I mean, memoirs are pretty popular for a lot of different reasons, but I think I think a lot of readers like memoirs because they can try to go along on the journey with the author, not only in events, but how the story unfolds and what they find out about external events and also about themselves. So I think, my hope is that people think it's well written, that they care about the story, and hopefully come away with something personal that they can apply.
Absolutely. There is much to learn about your story from you, and I'm sure a lot of people would want to know more about you from you, about this story, about the other stories that you have written, and and many more stories that life may have in store. Who knows? Let them get in touch with you. So what's the best way for them to do so that?
They should visit my website. It's my name altogether, LarryBograd.com. They'll get more information about this book, about me, about the other works that I've produced. There's even some family photos of my dad when he was young and my family when I was young. There'll be other reviews and interviews that I've had. There's a contact form if people want to contact me. And there's various ways to find me on social media as well as order the book if they want to order it through the website. So yeah, LarryBograd.com would be the best way to go.
Absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.